My beloved child, something has changed inside your soulmate, and this time they cannot simply push it aside and pretend everything is normal. For longer than you realize, they have been carrying feelings for you that were much deeper than their words ever revealed. They convinced themselves that silence was safer. They thought there would always be another conversation, another perfect moment, another chance to finally say what had been sitting quietly inside their heart. But now they are beginning to understand something they never expected. Waiting did not make those feelings disappear. It made them stronger. And the strongest emotion rising inside them now is regret. Not because caring about you was a mistake, but because they allowed you to live without knowing just how important you had become to them. There were moments when they almost told you. Moments when a simple conversation could have turned into something unforgettable. They would look at your name, remember something you said, replay a small interaction, and suddenly feel the words rising inside them, "You mean more to me than you know." Yet somehow, they would stop themselves. They would change the subject. They would act casual. They would hide behind ordinary words when their heart was trying to say something extraordinary. And here is where this becomes surprising, because your soulmate once believed they were doing the mature thing by staying quiet. They believed controlling their emotions would protect the connection. They believed that if they revealed too much, too soon, everything might become complicated. But recently, one realization has completely reversed that belief. They have started wondering whether their silence created the very distance they were trying to prevent. Don't skip this moment, because the deepest regret is not simply that they failed to confess their feelings. It is connected to one particular memory involving you, a memory they have returned to again and again. At the time, you may have thought nothing unusual was happening. You may have walked away from that moment believing it was just another conversation, another exchange, another ordinary chapter between two people. But your soulmate remembers it differently. They remember what they wanted to tell you. They remember how close they came. And most of all, they remember the expression on your face when they chose silence instead. That memory has become impossible for them to ignore because they now understand something they did not understand then. You may have been waiting for honesty too. That possibility has shaken them more deeply than they expected. What if you noticed? What if you sensed there was something behind their silence? What if there was a moment when your heart quietly opened the door, and they were too afraid of changing everything to walk through it? They cannot prove what you were thinking, but the question alone has become powerful enough to follow them into quiet moments. And every time it returns, so does the same thought: why didn't I just tell them? Stay till the end, because there is another layer to this story that changes what their silence actually meant. Your soulmate was never emotionless toward you. In fact, the opposite may have been true. Their feelings became so meaningful that they started overthinking every possible outcome. They wondered whether telling you would bring you closer or make you step away. They wondered whether they had misunderstood your kindness. They wondered whether the connection mattered equally to you. And while they were searching for certainty, time kept moving. That is the part they regret now. They waited for a perfect sign when perhaps the only thing required was courage. They wanted a guarantee before revealing something that could never come with guarantees. And now something has happened inside them. They are tired of pretending that what they feel is small. Because it isn't small anymore. It has become attached to memories, possibilities, unfinished sentences, and an image of a future they once refused to admit they had imagined with you. There is one detail your soulmate has never been able to explain, even to themselves, whenever they seriously try to convince themselves that they should simply forget these feelings, something reminds them of you. Not necessarily something dramatic. Sometimes it is ridiculously ordinary. A phrase that sounds like something you would say. A place that brings back a conversation. A song that carries the same emotional atmosphere as a memory. A quiet evening when there is nobody distracting them from what they actually feel. And suddenly, there you are again in their thoughts. At first, they dismissed this as nostalgia. They told themselves they were only remembering you because certain experiences naturally leave impressions. But nostalgia usually becomes softer with time. This did not. Instead, your absence from certain moments made your importance clearer. Your soulmate started noticing the spaces where your presence would have mattered. They began experiencing good moments and wondering what you would have said. They would hear something funny and instinctively imagine telling you. They would accomplish something meaningful and wonder whether you would be proud. They would have difficult days and remember how strangely comforting your presence once felt, even when you were doing nothing extraordinary. That realization disturbed the story they had been telling themselves. Because if you were merely a passing feeling, why were you still appearing in the future they imagined? Why did their mind keep placing you inside moments that had not even happened yet? That question opened a door they had kept closed for far too long. Something huge is waiting for you here, because your soulmate's regret is not based only on missing the past. They are beginning to regret what their silence may have cost them in the future. There is a difference. Missing a memory is one thing. Realizing that your own hesitation may have prevented beautiful memories from ever being created is something else entirely. And that is where their emotions became harder to control. They started mentally rewriting old conversations. I should have said this. I should have asked that. I should have stayed a little longer. I should have been honest when they gave me that opportunity. But one memory keeps appearing above all the others. It was a moment when you said something that seemed simple on the surface, yet your soulmate now believes there may have been another meaning beneath it. Perhaps you asked a question about their future. Perhaps you spoke about relationships, timing, trust, or the kind of person who truly understands you. Perhaps you simply became unusually vulnerable for a few seconds. Whatever the exact moment was, your soulmate remembers feeling an opening. Their heart immediately recognized it. Something inside them said, "Tell them now." And still, they didn't. They responded carefully. They kept things safe. They allowed the conversation to pass. Later, they told themselves there would be another chance. That is the sentence they regret most, there will be another chance. Because now they understand that meaningful moments do not always announce themselves. Sometimes the biggest turning point looks completely ordinary while it is happening. Only afterward do you realize that life quietly placed a door in front of you, and you walked past it. Your soulmate has been thinking about that door. They have wondered where the two of you might be emotionally today if they had spoken honestly then. And what makes this even more intense is that they are beginning to suspect you might have interpreted their silence incorrectly. Maybe you thought they were uninterested. Maybe you assumed they had already made their decision. Maybe you started protecting your own heart because their behavior gave you no reason to believe something deeper existed. That possibility is becoming unbearable to ignore. Because from their perspective, silence meant, I care so much that I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. But from your perspective, silence could easily have looked like, I don't care enough to say anything. Two completely different meanings. One quiet misunderstanding. And potentially an entire emotional chapter shaped by something neither person ever clearly said. What happened next inside your soulmate was subtle at first, but it changed everything. They stopped asking themselves whether they had feelings for you and started asking themselves why they had been hiding those feelings in the first place. That distinction matters. Before, their internal conversation was filled with uncertainty. Do I really feel this deeply? Is this temporary? Am I imagining the connection? But those questions have begun disappearing. The emotion has survived too many attempts to dismiss it. It has remained through distance, distraction, ordinary life, changing circumstances, and countless efforts to rationalize it. So now the question has become different. If this feeling is real, what am I going to do about it? And that question has brought your soulmate face to face with something uncomfortable. They cannot continue blaming timing forever. They cannot continue waiting for some magical moment when every uncertainty disappears. They cannot expect you to understand feelings they have never expressed. That last realization struck especially hard. For a long time, part of them quietly hoped you would somehow know. They hoped you could read between the lines. They hoped their small gestures communicated what their words never did. Maybe they remembered details about you. Maybe they checked in at moments that mattered. Maybe their voice changed slightly when they spoke to you. Maybe they treated you with a softness they rarely showed other people. Inside their own mind, these things felt obvious. They thought, surely they can tell. But recently, your soulmate has realized how unfair that assumption may have been. You were never supposed to decode them. You were never responsible for translating silence into affection. If they wanted you to know the truth, they needed to give you something clearer than hints. And this is where regret began transforming into something else. It began becoming determination. Don't skip now, because this does not mean your soulmate suddenly has every word prepared. Far from it. They have rehearsed conversations in their head and abandoned them halfway through. They have imagined telling you everything and then immediately worried they would say too much. They have considered beginning with something small, something safe, perhaps simply admitting that they have been thinking about you more than they ever revealed. But each imagined conversation eventually reaches the same sentence, the one they have avoided for so long: I should have told you sooner. That is the emotional center of everything. They are not only thinking about what they feel today. They are thinking about how long they have felt it. And when they look backward, certain moments suddenly make sense. Why your opinion mattered so much. Why they remembered tiny things you probably forgot. Why seeing you happy affected their mood. Why certain conversations stayed with them for days. Why the idea of you becoming emotionally distant felt heavier than they expected. Why they occasionally wanted to say something meaningful and then became strangely quiet instead. They can finally see the pattern. And once you see a pattern clearly, it becomes difficult to return to pretending it never existed. But there is another revelation they have not fully processed yet. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that what they feared losing by speaking honestly may already have been endangered by their silence. They thought honesty was the risk. Now they realize silence was also a choice with consequences. Every unanswered feeling created uncertainty. Every withheld truth left room for assumptions. Every moment they acted less interested than they really were may have encouraged you to emotionally move in another direction. That possibility has created a new urgency inside them, not a frantic urgency, but the quiet awareness that meaningful connections cannot live forever inside imagination. Eventually, something must become real. A conversation. An acknowledgement. A moment of honesty. Something that finally allows both people to know where they actually stand. And then came the realization your soulmate was least prepared for. They were not only hiding their feelings from you. They had been hiding the full depth of those feelings from themselves. That is why their regret has become so powerful now. It is not simply a matter of thinking, I liked this person and never said it. Their heart has started showing them that the connection occupied a much larger place in their emotional world than they had admitted. They can trace it through dozens of seemingly unrelated moments. Choices they made differently because they wondered what you would think. Conversations with other people that somehow reminded them of you. Standards that changed because they experienced the way you listened, spoke, cared, or understood something about them. Even their definition of emotional closeness may have quietly changed after knowing you. And when they finally connected all these pieces, one conclusion became impossible to avoid: you were never ordinary to them. Perhaps they treated the connection casually on the outside. Perhaps circumstances made everything look unfinished. Perhaps neither of you ever gave the relationship a clear name. But emotional significance does not always wait for labels. Sometimes someone becomes important long before either person knows what to call the bond. Your soulmate is realizing that now. Stay a little longer, because this is where the once-in-a-lifetime revelation enters the story. There is something they once imagined doing with you, something connected not to the past but to the future. They may never have mentioned it. In fact, they probably dismissed the thought immediately when it first appeared. It could have been as simple as imagining you beside them during an important milestone, traveling somewhere meaningful, celebrating an achievement together, introducing you more deeply into their world, or sharing an ordinary life moment that somehow felt extraordinary because you were there. The specific image matters less than what it revealed. Their mind had already begun including you in chapters that had not happened yet. That scared them. Because remembering someone is easy to explain. Imagining someone in your future is harder to dismiss. So they buried the thought. They told themselves not to read too much into it. But it returned. Different setting, same feeling. You were there. And eventually your soulmate understood that their regret was not only saying, "I wish I had told you how I felt." Beneath it was a much bigger sentence: "I wish I had given us the chance to discover what this could have become." That sentence changed everything. Because it moved their emotions beyond confession and toward possibility. Suddenly, they were no longer wondering only whether you would have accepted their feelings back then. They were wondering whether there is still something unfinished between you now. They started reviewing your interactions from a different perspective. Were there moments when you stayed longer than necessary? Did you remember things about them too? Did your energy change during certain conversations? Did you ever seem disappointed when they became distant? Did you ever give them an opportunity to become more emotionally honest? They cannot know your inner world without hearing it from you, and they understand that. But for the first time, they are willing to admit that the possibility may have existed. And that possibility has awakened something they thought they could keep asleep forever: hope. Not certainty. Not fantasy. Hope. The kind that says perhaps one honest conversation could finally replace years of assumptions. Perhaps the story is not asking them to rewrite the past. Perhaps it is asking them to stop repeating the same silence in the present. Now your soulmate stands at an emotional threshold they can no longer pretend not to see. On one side is everything familiar, keeping their feelings private, wondering what might have happened, replaying memories, interpreting signs, and carrying regret quietly. On the other side is uncertainty, yes, but also truth. And truth has begun looking less frightening than another year of unanswered questions. This is the shift you need to understand. Their regret is becoming impossible to ignore because it is no longer passive sadness about a missed moment. It is becoming a message from within themselves: do something differently. They know they cannot control your response. They know they cannot return to an earlier chapter and choose different words. They know honesty does not guarantee the exact outcome they once imagined. But they are finally understanding that the purpose of honesty is not to control an outcome. It is to stop hiding from reality. That realization has given them a kind of courage they did not have before. And there is one final thing they wish you knew, perhaps more than anything else. If their behavior ever made you feel unimportant, their heart tells a completely different story. If their silence made you believe there was nothing deeper beneath the surface, they regret creating that impression. If you ever wondered why they seemed warm one moment and guarded the next, they now understand that their own internal conflict may have been visible in ways they never intended. They were trying to manage feelings that had already become bigger than their strategy for hiding them. Every time they moved closer emotionally, fear told them to retreat. Every time distance appeared, their heart reminded them why they wanted closeness. Back and forth, again and again, until they became exhausted by their own hesitation. And now the strangest thing has happened: the possibility of telling you the truth feels calmer than continuing to hide it. Something that once seemed terrifying now feels almost relieving. They imagine finally saying, "There was more behind my silence than you knew." They imagine admitting that certain moments mattered. They imagine telling you that you remained in their thoughts long after conversations ended. They imagine explaining that their distance was not always indifference. And above everything, they imagine looking at you without hiding behind carefully chosen words and simply letting the truth exist between you. Whether that truth opens a new chapter or simply brings clarity, your soulmate increasingly feels that it deserves to be spoken. Because their greatest regret is not that everything failed to happen exactly as they dreamed. Their greatest regret is that they never gave truth the opportunity to decide what could happen at all. And this is the revelation they have reached after all that silence. Sometimes the person you are most afraid to lose is the person who most deserves to know how deeply they matter. Your soulmate thought they could protect themselves by keeping their heart hidden. Instead, they discovered that hidden feelings do not disappear, they become unfinished sentences that follow you into quiet rooms, unexpected memories, and imagined futures. Now those sentences are asking to be completed. And somewhere beneath all the hesitation, beneath all the memories, beneath every missed opportunity and every word they swallowed, there is one truth becoming louder than their regret. If another genuine moment arrives between you, they do not want to make the same choice again. They do not want to leave believing there would always be another chance. They do not want you guessing what their silence meant. This time, they want the courage to let you know that behind everything they never said was a feeling that never became as small as they hoped it would, and perhaps the biggest surprise is that their regret has finally taught them what their silence never could. Some feelings become impossible to hide because they were never meant to remain hidden forever. Something even more unexpected has started happening inside your soulmate, and this is where their regret begins revealing a truth they never planned to face. They are no longer remembering you only during lonely or quiet moments. You are appearing in their thoughts when life is actually going well. A good conversation happens, and they wonder what you would have added to it. Something makes them smile, and for a second they imagine sharing it with you. They hear someone describe the kind of connection people spend years searching for, and suddenly their mind returns to the way they felt understood around you. That is what has unsettled them most. They once believed they missed you because something was absent from their life, but now they are beginning to realize they think of you even when nothing is missing. Your presence became connected to something deeper than temporary emotion. And one recent realization made everything sharper. They remembered a moment when you gave them more emotional space than they deserved. You could have demanded answers. You could have questioned their confusing behavior. You could have forced clarity. Instead, there was a moment when you simply allowed them to be themselves. At the time, your soulmate barely understood the significance of that kindness. Now they do. They realize you may have been offering them something incredibly rare, the freedom to speak honestly without being pressured. And they still remain silent. That memory has become one of their deepest regrets because now they understand that you were not asking them for perfection. Perhaps you were simply waiting for sincerity. They keep returning to the possibility that one honest sentence could have changed the emotional direction of everything. Not some dramatic declaration. Not perfectly rehearsed words. Just something real. You matter to me more than I've shown. They could have said it. They almost did. But they worried about what would happen afterward, so they chose the familiar comfort of saying nothing. Now the aftermath they feared has been replaced by something harder, wondering what might have happened if they had trusted the connection instead of constantly protecting themselves from it. Stay a little longer, because the most surprising part is still ahead. Your soulmate has recently stopped viewing their hesitation as proof that the feeling was uncertain. They now understand that sometimes people hesitate precisely because something matters enormously. Small feelings rarely create this much internal conflict. Ordinary connections do not usually leave this many unfinished questions. And that realization has forced them to admit something they once refused to say even privately. You reached a part of them that very few people ever reached. There was another turning point, one so ordinary that nobody around your soulmate would have noticed it. Someone spoke casually about regret, not necessarily about relationships, not necessarily about you, and said something that stayed in your soulmate's mind long after the conversation ended. The idea was simple: sometimes people do not regret the answer they received, they regret never giving themselves the chance to hear an answer at all. Your soulmate immediately thought of you. They tried moving past it, but the thought followed them. What answer had they been afraid of? And why had they decided your answer before ever allowing you to give one? That question exposed something important. For a long time, your soulmate had created imaginary outcomes inside their mind. Maybe you would not understand. Maybe the timing was wrong. Maybe you saw them differently. Maybe speaking honestly would change the connection. They constructed possibilities, treated those possibilities like facts, and then behaved according to conclusions you had never actually given them. Now they can see how much of their silence was built on assumptions. And once they saw that, something inside them shifted. What if they had been wrong? What if you had felt more than they realized? What if some of your own quiet moments were not indifference but uncertainty? What if both of you were waiting for the other person to make something clear? They know they cannot rewrite history around possibilities, and they are trying not to romanticize things they cannot prove. But there is one fact they can no longer escape: they never truly gave you the opportunity to understand what was happening inside them. Don't skip here, because that realization led directly to something they had never done before. Your soulmate began imagining the conversation without trying to control your response. Previously, whenever they pictured confessing their feelings, they immediately imagined what you might say next. They would rehearse your reaction before they even rehearsed their own truth. That made everything overwhelming. But recently, the imagined conversation changed. They pictured simply telling you what was real and allowing you to respond however you genuinely felt. For the first time, honesty seemed possible. They imagined saying that certain memories stayed with them. That they sometimes acted distant because the connection felt stronger than expected. That they wished they had handled some moments differently. That you became important before they were emotionally prepared to admit it. And then came the sentence that stopped them completely: I never stopped wondering what could have happened between us. They sat with that thought because it felt too accurate to dismiss. And once they admitted it, another question followed immediately: what if the chapter they thought they missed has not completely closed?